Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. These words of Jesus we hear on the 22nd Sunday in Ordinary Time. By speaking out for humility, Jesus tells us that to follow him is to live this virtue as is manifest in his life. Although born to be a king, he was born in a humble stable, into a poor family. Indeed, and as Jesus came to bear witness to the truth, humility too is a witness to the truth. During my holiday to the Netherlands and Europe, I saw how people are now feeling the pinch of the sharp increase in prices of energy, like electricity and gas, and the increase in prices of food, the same as is happening here in Nigeria. This calls for a humble step back in the high standard of living and an acceptance that nobody is above the web of life. We are all connected, and as such we depend on each other. This in itself calls for humility. No wonder that St. Benedict of Nursia made the chapter of humility the longest in his famous Rule of St. Benedict, by which numerous religious and lay people live their lives. The first words of this chapter on humility are the following. Brothers, the Holy Scriptures cry to us, saying, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. It was at this point that I remembered how once a presidential candidate declared, it is now my turn. Emi lo okon. A grabbing of the highest chair before voting. How far our spirit can manifest itself far from humility, we saw again with the construction and maiden voyage of the ship called Titanic. During my holiday, I had the chance to visit a museum dedicated to the ship, the Titanic, which was built in Belfast, Ireland. The tour leads you from the very beginning of the preparation for the building of the ship to the disastrous collision with an iceberg on its first journey and its consequent sinking down of 4,000 meters to the bottom of the ocean. The ship, the Titanic, was proclaimed the first, the best, the biggest, and the safest of its class. And as if this boast was not enough yet, when it came to the launching of the ship into the water, there was no room for God, no evocation of his name, no prayer, no ritual whatsoever. And then listen to this observation. When the ship was growing, the iceberg was also growing. We can be unfaithful to God. We can even ignore him or put ourselves in his place. But still there is place for his mercy. And so, before hitting the iceberg, several warning signals came for all the ships, which were sent to the Titanic. But because of the heavy radio traffic of passengers sending messages to family and friends, these warning signals were put on hold. And even when they later reached those in command, it was late and not well handled. The result was devastating. The total number of passengers on board by far outnumbered the life rafts present. And so the doors of the lower decks were never opened to avoid crowds on the deck. causing them to drown right there in their cabin, whereas many others drowned in the ice-cold seawater. At this juncture, let's again revisit the prophet Micah. You have already been told what is right and what Yahweh wants of you. Only this, to do what is right, to love loyalty, and to walk humbly with your God. To work humbly with your God is to acknowledge His presence and to talk with Him as with your best friend, which is prayer, according to Saint Teresa of Avila. And see how humility is anchored in true prayer. Humility is the foundation of prayer. As such, the Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches us only when we humbly acknowledge that we do not know how to pray as we ought, are we ready to receive freely the gift of prayer. This confirms what St. Augustine says. We are a beggar before God. Furthermore, see how humility comes out in adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. In true adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, we acknowledge that we are a creature before our Creator. In that humility, adoration becomes homage of our spirit to the King of Glory. Having reached this height of humility, we can be compared to the spirit of the just man made perfect, of whom today's second reading talks, and who find themselves in the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. Having said this, it is important to note that humility is not just played out between you and God. It is very much at stake among the people we live with, the well-to-do and the less well-to-do, known as the poor and the physically challenged. Let us take a medical doctor. With all his medical knowledge, we can raise him up high above us. But for his knowledge and expertise to be effective, he needs to come down among us, among the rich and the poor. And so we see the call of humility to those who have been privileged to study and climb higher on the social ladder. But likewise is there the call to humility for those who have not. The quick rich mentality, by hook or by crook, at the expense of others, certainly contributes to our insecurity and is to be detested by all. If in all our humility we acknowledge our gifts and talents, and we use and develop them for the good of others and the glory of God, then we will realize that we are not the same. Some are roses, others little violets. Some are bright stars, others are fate. But together we form a beautiful unity. Or in the words of St. Teresa of the Child Jesus, if every tiny flower wants to be a rose, spring would lose its loveliness. Having painted this picture of humility, there is no need to look to humility as a sacrifice or cross, because, as the book of Sirach tells us, it is to the humble that God reveals His mysteries, and He is glorified by the humble. How true the words of the Lord! Everyone who exalts himself will be humble, and everyone who humbles himself will be exalted.